Captain Reynolds, we need you up front. Now! The tremor in Lauren Mitchell's voice, the head flight attendant, made all 147 passengers look up at once. Phones stopped scrolling. Coffee cups paused mid-air. An unnatural silence draped itself over the first-class cabin. Somewhere, someone whispered, "What's going on?" In seat 2A, a middle-aged black man sat motionless. David Carter, 48, did not react. He simply tilted his wrist, letting the cabin lights reflect across the glass of his Patek Philippe watch. 12 minutes had passed, and he hadn't moved, not since Lauren began her interrogation. "Sir, this is holding up the entire flight," Lauren said, her voice slipping from authority into tremor. "You need to show your real ticket." David remained still, his finger tapping softly on the tray table, his gaze fixed as if he could see straight through the heavy air of suspicion. Passengers murmured around him. A young man raised his phone, starting a live stream. A married couple leaned in to whisper, "He must have gotten that seat on the black market." None of them knew that the man they were dismissing was waiting for the perfect moment to flip the entire game. Lauren clenched her teeth. She had dealt with difficult passengers before, but David's silence chilled her blood. "The captain is coming," she snapped. David finally lifted his head, a faint smile touching his lips. Not mocking, not defiant, just enough to make Lauren's entire body tense. "I know," he replied, calm and clipped. His phone vibrated quietly. On the screen, a message flashed. "Legal team, everything ready, sir. Just give us the word." He folded it shut like it was a trivial detail. But in Lauren's chest, a sense of dread burned like fire. Every row had now turned into a stage. Sophie Turner, just 23, held her phone with trembling hands as her live stream count spiked. 5,000, 8,000, 12,000. Comments streamed in like wildfire. "Did she really just say that? This is insane. Southwest about to get sued." Captain Thomas Reynolds appeared in the aisle, shoulders square, 4 gold stripes gleaming under the cabin light. 25 years of flying had taught him one thing. Situations like this demanded decisiveness. But when his eyes fell on David, tailored suit, composed posture, hands calmly folded, he hesitated. This did not look like a troublemaker. Yet Lauren had never lied to him. "Sir," Reynolds began, his voice steady, authoritative. "I understand there's been some confusion. May I see your boarding pass?" David didn't speak. He slowly placed the ticket in Reynolds's hand. "Flight 2847, seat 2A." Reynolds checked. Everything was valid. "It looks legitimate," he said carefully. Lauren immediately cut in, her voice rising loud enough for the entire cabin. "It's fake. Look at him, Captain. Does he belong in first class?" The cabin froze. Her words dropped like a stone into a still lake, sending shockwaves through every soul. Passengers whispered sharply. Phones shook in angry hands. Sophie's eyes widened. Her live stream viewership shot past 15,000. Hashtag after hashtag flooded her screen. Southwest discrimination. Finally, David spoke. His voice was warm, steady, but with a blade hidden underneath. "People like me?" Just 3 words, yet the air crystallized into ice. Lauren's face flushed. She blurted out, "I see hundreds of passengers every day. I know who belongs where." A phrase she thought routine, but it was a sentence of judgment. In the cabin, every eye locked on seat 2A. Reynolds could feel it, the weight of judgment hovering in the air. Not just for the man in front of him, but for him too. The captain of this flight. David eased back into his seat, his gaze deep and unflinching. He knew this power play had just begun, and everyone watching, inside the cabin and outside, across tens of thousands of screens, was about to witness a turn no one could have imagined. The air in the cabin was so thick it felt starved of oxygen. Captain Thomas Reynolds drew a deep breath, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Sir, I need further identification. A driver's license, a credit card, anything to verify." David Carter tilted his head, his gaze probing. Slowly, he unbuttoned his jacket. For a split second, Reynolds felt his chest tighten. After decades in the cockpit, he knew even the smallest gesture could signal the start of a storm. But David only drew out a sleek Italian leather wallet. He opened it, revealing a gleaming card, an American Express Centurion. The rare cord with an annual fee of $10,000, a symbol of the ultra-wealthy. Silence spread through the cabin. Reynolds swallowed hard, his voice faltering. This is a very exclusive card." "Correct," David nodded lightly. "But it seems even that is not enough for me to sit in the seat I paid for." Lauren bit her lip, refusing to back down. These seats cost $800 each. He could have used points or some cheap upgrade trick. There's no way he paid in full. David raised his face, his tone calm and deliberate. "I paid in full at 6:43 this morning." The precision was chilling. Who remembered the exact minute? Reynolds felt a cold shiver trace down his spine. 7 minutes until scheduled departure. A businessman in 1C tapped his shoe impatiently, glaring at his watch. A woman in 3D raised her phone, recording the entire scene. In 4A, a teenager was live streaming, the notifications of "viewer joined" chiming like war drums. Lauren turned back, her voice sharp and shrill. "Captain, passengers are complaining. We need action. Now!" Reynolds felt the weight of 147 eyes waiting. His authority, the order of the flight, all of it hung in the balance. "Sir," Reynolds said to David, "I have no choice but to ask you to leave the plane. We will resolve this at the service desk." A dreadful silence fell. David lifted his eyes, the dark depths of them like an abyss. His words came slowly, each one falling like a hammer on steel. "No." The sound cut through the cabin like a blade. Reynolds had heard that answer from passengers in handcuffs before, but this was different. Not anger, not despair. Absolute certainty. Lauren's face flushed red. "That's it. I'm calling security. He's trespassing." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Lauren, make the call." David glanced at his watch, his voice low but carrying clearly enough for all to hear. "Captain, before you do that, are you familiar with Federal Aviation Regulation 91.11? Reynolds froze. The law that defined crew authority, quoted with unnerving accuracy. "Are you threatening legal action?" David gave a faint smile. I'm only asking whether you understand the legal framework you're standing in." Sophie Turner could hardly believe her eyes. Her live stream count surged. 30,000, 32,000, 35,000. Comments flooded in. "This is 2024, and still racism. Get this crew fired. CNN needs this." 6 minutes until takeoff. Reynolds's radio crackled. "Captain Reynolds, this is ground security. We're boarding to deal with the passenger." "Copy that," Reynolds replied, though unease gnawed deeper in his chest. David lowered his voice, steady and precise. "Before they arrive, you should know this entire conversation has been recorded. At least 12 devices in this cabin are live streaming. Your flight attendant has made statements that can be classified as discriminatory under federal law." He paused, eyes locking with Reynolds. "In about 30 seconds, you will receive a call that may end your career or end this airline." At that exact moment, Reynolds's phone buzzed violently. The screen lit up. "Southwest Operations Center, urgent." David leaned back in his seat, fingers interlaced, his voice carrying the weight of judgment. "Perhaps you should answer." The cabin fell into suffocating silence. Reynolds felt the burden of 25 years in uniform pressing down on him. Lauren trembled, her face flushed with blood, yet she forced her glare to remain sharp. And David Carter, the man dismissed as someone who didn't belong in first class, sat poised, calm as a judge waiting to deliver his verdict. The heavy sound of boots echoed up the jet bridge. 2 security officers entered, their dark blue uniforms tense under the cabin lights. Officer Angela Park, sharp-eyed and composed, walked beside Daniel Perez, broad-shouldered, one hand already resting on the zip ties at his belt. "Captain Reynolds," Angela said firmly, "what's the situation?" Lauren immediately pointed, her voice trembling but urgent. "There. That passenger has occupied first class for 30 minutes. He refuses to leave the plane. He's disruptive, threatening staff. We need him off immediately." Every phone in the cabin was aimed at seat 2A. David Carter sat unmoved, hands folded, his gaze calm. He didn't need words. The way he sat alone tightened the air around him. Angela stepped forward, her tone controlled and professional. "Sir, I need you to cooperate. Please stand and come with us." David tilted his head slightly, his voice even but carrying the weight of steel. "I am sitting in the seat I paid for, with a valid ticket. I'm not going anywhere." Daniel stepped closer, his tone hard. "You're obstructing flight operations. That's a federal offense. This is your final warning." Sophie Turner clutched her phone, her live stream surging past 50,000 viewers, the comments cascading like thunder. They're arresting him for sitting? This is crazy. Lawsuit incoming." Sweat gathered at Reynolds's temple. He had seen drunk passengers, loud, violent, and unruly. But this man was different. No insults, no wasted motion, only a cold certainty. David glanced at his watch, the simple gesture making the entire cabin bristle as though bracing for an explosion. "Before you proceed," he said it slowly, "I have one question." Angela frowned. "This isn't the time." "A simple question," David cut her off, his voice low but carrying across the cabin. "Are you aware of the legal consequences of unlawful detention?" The phrase hit like a bomb. Angela froze, and Daniel flinched. This wasn't the language of a defiant passenger. It was the language of an attorney, the language of someone who knew exactly where the red lines were. Lauren snapped, nearly shouting. "He's been threatening us from the start, timing everything, checking his watch, obviously planning something." Angela turned on her, her tone cold. "Can you specify exactly what he has threatened?" Lauren stammered. He said there would be consequences. He kept checking his watch. Clearly he's plotting." The surrounding passengers erupted. Sophie's camera caught it all, the comments pouring in. She really said that? Looking at a watch equals terrorist? Fire her now. 4 minutes to departure. Reynolds swallowed hard. He could feel his 25-year career teetering on the edge of collapse. Yet pressed by Lauren and watched by the entire cabin, he lifted his radio. "Officers, remove him. We cannot keep 147 passengers hostage for one man." Daniel nodded, pulling out the zip ties. "Sir, stand up. Hands behind your back." David didn't move. He looked directly into Reynolds' eyes, then at the two officers. His voice was steady, deep, and absolute. "Captain Reynolds, how long have you been flying?" Reynolds hesitated. 25 years. "Officer Perez, how long have you served?" 8 years, Daniel answered instinctively. David nodded slowly. "In the next 30 seconds, both of you will have to explain to your superiors why you detained the wrong man." As his words fell, Reynolds' radio crackled to life again. "Captain Reynolds, stand by. Directive from executive level. Do not act until further notice." "Executive level?" Reynolds muttered. A bead of sweat slid down his face. That level usually meant the board, or headquarters itself. The cabin sank into dead silence. All eyes turned to David Carter. The man in seat 2A rose slowly, deliberately, with a presence that commanded the air. His voice was low but thunderous. "You are about to arrest the very man this company cannot afford to lose." Angela froze. Daniel's hand stopped mid-air. Reynolds' eyes widened, his pulse racing. And Lauren, her face drained, chest heaving, suddenly realized she had dragged not just her own career, but the entire company into a pit she could never climb out of. The entire cabin held its breath. The zip tie still dangled from Daniel Perez's hand, but he didn't dare take another step. Officer Angela Park furrowed her brow, trying to maintain composure, though a dark premonition was already flooding her chest. At that very moment, the phone in Captain Thomas Reynolds' breast pocket buzzed violently. On the screen, bold letters flashed. "Southwest Operations Center, urgent." His heart nearly stopped. In 25 years of flying, he had never once received a direct emergency call from the operations center seconds before departure. He answered, his voice rough and unsteady. "Reynolds speaking." On the other end, a woman's voice, commanding and precise, left no room for hesitation. "Captain Reynolds, this is Evelyn Brooks, Senior Vice President. From this moment forward, you are not to lay a hand on the passenger in seat 2A. I repeat, do not touch him." It was like a bolt of lightning splitting him open. Reynolds lifted his gaze toward David Carter. The man was still standing, quietly adjusting the lapel of his tailored suit, an inscrutable smile forming at the corner of his lips. Lauren Mitchell lurched forward, practically screaming. "No, they don't understand. He's tricked all of you. Look at him. It's obvious he doesn't belong here. He—" Her voice choked off when David drew from his leather briefcase a folder embossed with silver, the kind of insignia few in the cabin had ever seen. He opened it, removed a card, and handed it calmly to Angela Park. Angela glanced down. One look was enough to drain the color from her face. Her hand trembled as she passed the card to Daniel. His eyes widened in shock. Reynolds stepped forward, his voice catching in his throat. What does it say?" Angela swallowed hard. Her voice, barely more than a whisper, still carried through the suffocating silence of the cabin. "David Carter, chairman of the board, Southwest Airlines." A wave of gasps and murmurs erupted. Several passengers covered their mouths. Sophie Turner nearly dropped her phone, but her live stream kept rolling, viewership soaring past 70,000. The comments surged like a tidal wave. "OMG, he's the chairman. They tried to kick their own boss off the plane. This airline is done." Lauren shook her head frantically, as if reality itself were slipping away. No, it can't be. The chairman of the board never flies commercial. They have private jets, security details. This has to be fake." At that instant, Reynolds's radio crackled again. But this time, the voice was deep, powerful, and heavy with authority, sending a chill through the cabin. "Captain Reynolds, this is Christopher Hayes, CEO of Southwest Airlines. Direct order. No one is to take any action against Mr. Carter. This directive comes straight from the full board." Reynolds felt his knees buckle. 25 years of flying, his entire career and honor, now hung by the thinnest thread. David Carter closed the folder, his gaze sharp, though he didn't raise his voice. "Do you want to know why I sat silently for half an hour? Because I do not need to prove that I deserve the seat I paid for. It was you, with your arrogance and prejudice, who proved everything for me." Lauren broke down, sobbing like someone lost in a storm. Angela Park lowered her eyes, clutching the business card like a death warrant. Daniel Perez stepped back entirely, the zip tie slipping from his hand and hitting the floor with a hollow snap. Reynolds stood frozen, his phone still pressed taut to his ear, as the CEO's voice cut once more, like a blade of ice. "Captain, Mr. Carter is not just a passenger. He is the man who holds the fate of your career. And every mistake tonight, the whole world has already seen." The cabin erupted in chaos, whispers, cries, the frantic tapping of keyboards. Sophie huddled by the window, eyes locked on her screen. Viewers, 90,000, 95,000, 100,000. The hashtag Justice for Seat 2A was exploding into a global trend. David Carter sat back down in seat 2A, crossed his arms and gave a small, decisive nod. His voice rumbled through the cabin, calm yet unyielding. "Now, we begin. And I promise you this. Those who demeaned me today will answer for it before the entire nation." The cabin erupted after the revelation. This was no longer an ordinary flight. It had become a public tribunal with hundreds of witnesses on board, and hundreds of thousands more watching through the glowing screens of their phones. David Carter sat upright in seat 2A, arms folded, his eyes resolute like a presiding judge. He did not need to raise his voice. Every word he spoke was enough to plunge the cabin into absolute silence. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, calling Lauren by name, cutting into her like a blade. What was it you just said in front of everyone? That people like me don't belong in first class?" Lauren stammered, her face streaked with tears. I didn't. What I meant was," David cut her off, his tone like cold steel. "Not what you meant, but what you believe. You don't need to explain. More than 100,000 people have already heard it, already recorded it. The world will not forget." Captain Reynolds stood frozen, his heartbeat pounding in his chest. He wanted to speak, to explain that he had only acted on the report from his flight attendant, that he never bore ill intent. But at that very moment, his phone buzzed again. A message flashed across the screen. "CNN, Fox, NBC, all awaiting official comment. We are under global scrutiny." Sweat dripped from his temple, staining the uniform that had once been his pride. Now it felt like a heavy shroud, threatening to pull his career into the abyss. Sophie Turner could hardly hold her phone steady. Viewers passed 120,000. Comments poured in like a flood. "This is history happening live. Fire the racist crew now. Respect must be earned, not assumed." Her breath shook, but her eyes lit up. Sophie knew this wasn't just another viral clip. This was evidence, a turning point that could reshape the entire airline industry. David Carter slowly opened his leather briefcase once more. This time, he pulled out not just a business card, but a thick dossier, each page neatly tabbed. He set it on the folding tray, every sound echoing like a judge's gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the cabin, "what you just witnessed is not an isolated incident. This quarter alone, Southwest Airlines received 47 complaints about discrimination, yet not one member of the board ever experienced it firsthand. I chose to see it myself, and the result is exactly what you have just seen." The cabin rippled with uneasy murmurs, tension spreading like fecal across dry grass. Lauren buried her face in her hands, her body shaking. "Please, I didn't mean to." David turned, his gaze sharp as a blade. "You didn't mean to, but you believed it was true. And that is the most dangerous part." Reynolds finally found his voice, though it trembled. "Sir, we had no way of knowing who you were." "Exactly," David said with a slow nod, his tone steady. "And that is the problem. Why is it that a black man, in a suit, sitting quietly in a first-class seat, is automatically seen as suspicious? If I were white, would you have asked for more documents? Would I have been accused of trespassing?" The question hung heavy, suffocating the cabin. Reynolds lowered his gaze. For the first time in 25 years, his heart sank like stone, because he knew the answer. Sophie raised her phone, capturing a close-up of David. His voice grew firmer, resonant, carrying like a declaration. "Tonight, all of America will look at Flight 2847. They will see the truth that small assumptions, those quiet prejudices, can destroy careers, destroy reputations, even destroy entire companies. And I promise you this, no one in this crew will ever again be able to say, 'I didn't know.'" The cabin stirred with whispers, some passengers nodding emphatically. A man in seat 1C, who had earlier complained about the delay, quietly put away his phone, now watching David with respect mingled with unease. Lauren collapsed into the nearest seat, sobbing uncontrollably. Reynolds clutched his radio, his hand trembling. Angela and Daniel, the two security officers, exchanged glances, their faces pale. They realized how close they had come to destroying their own careers by following an unspoken bias. David Carter checked his watch, then looked up, his voice steady and resonant. "We haven't even taken off, but I assure you, this flight will go down in history." The cabin was drowned in a suffocating silence. The auxiliary engines hummed outside the window, like war drums announcing a storm yet to break. Passengers sat frozen, the only light flickering across their tense faces, coming from the glow of hundreds of phone screens. Then a sharp beep cut through the air from the tablet David Carter had just placed on his tray table. He tapped it lightly. The screen lit up, revealing a sleek boardroom, polished glass, a long table lined with powerful figures sitting upright, staring directly into the camera. A deep, commanding female voice rang out. "David, are you all right?" It was Patricia Lewis, Vice President of Operations, a name that carried weight across the entire airline industry. Her presence on screen sent a shudder through the cabin. Passengers whispered, while Sophie Turner's live stream surged instantly, her viewer count jumping to 140,000. David answered calmly. "I'm fine, Patricia, but perhaps Captain Reynolds and Chief Purser Mitchell should explain to you why I, the chairman of the board, was threatened with handcuffs on my own company's plane." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. Reynolds trembled, his face drained of color. Lauren Mitchell dropped her head into her hands, sobs breaking from her throat. Another face appeared on the screen, stern, commanding, unmistakable. Christopher Hayes, CEO of Southwest Airlines. His voice was low and weighty, each word slicing through the air like a blade. "I've been watching the entire live stream, and I want an explanation. Right now." Reynolds struggled for breath, his voice cracking. "Sir, we didn't know who he was. The chief purser reported the passenger was disruptive. Only what, Captain?" Christopher cut in sharply, eyes glinting behind silver frames. "Only followed a baseless prejudice? Only assumed that a black man in a suit, sitting quietly in first class, was suspicious? Is that what you only did?" Reynolds fell silent, sweat streaming down his temple, his career teetering on the edge of collapse. Lauren's voice broke in, trembling, pathetic through her sobs. I didn't mean to. I just thought, I've seen so many passengers. They usually—" David cut her off, his voice firm, cold steel without raising volume. "You didn't mean to, but you believed I didn't belong in that seat. That isn't a mistake. That is bias." The screen expanded to reveal two more board members. A silver-haired man sighed heavily. "David, the whole world is watching. This is no longer a flight incident. This is a civil rights crisis." Christopher Hayes nodded, then looked straight into the camera. "From this moment, Mr. Carter has full authority. Every decision he makes is law." The cabin seemed to freeze solid. Reynolds looked ready to collapse to his knees. Lauren clutched the back of a seat, her face pale as chalk. David Carter rose slowly to his feet, turning to face the entire cabin. The light of the screen reflected across his face, casting him as both judge and beacon. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out, resonant, "you have just witnessed a historic moment. The truth is no longer hidden behind internal reports or empty apologies. It is happening here, now, in front of hundreds of thousands of witnesses." He paused, his gaze cutting across Reynolds, then Lauren. "And tonight, every consequence will fall like the strike of a gavel." Sophie's screen exploded with comments. "This is insane. The chairman is on board. History, Justice Live. They're done." Viewer count, 160,000, then 170,000, climbing by the second. David rested his hand firmly on the tray table, his voice steady and unyielding. Flight 2847 will no longer be just Dallas to Phoenix. It will be the turning point for the entire airline industry. The cabin felt compressed, like a courtroom suspended at 30,000 feet. Every eye was locked on one man, David Carter. He did not need a gavel, for his steady voice and commanding presence alone were enough to turn Seat 2A into a judge's bench. David turned to the screen, still open in front of him, where CEO Christopher Hayes and members of the board were silently watching. Then he fixed his gaze on Lauren Mitchell, his voice measured and cutting with each word. "You told hundreds of witnesses that someone like me does not belong in first class. That statement will not vanish. It has been recorded, shared, and preserved as evidence. And now, you must answer for it." Lauren collapsed into an empty seat nearby, her shoulders trembling violently. She wanted to explain, to beg, but David's words sliced away every excuse before it could be spoken. Then David faced Captain Reynolds. "And you, 25 years of flying. How many times have you ordered passengers removed without asking questions? How many times did you follow assumptions instead of seeking the truth?" Reynolds' throat tightened. He wanted to resist, to defend himself, but memories surged back. Passengers dragged from cabins, the furious eyes, his own silent nods to preserve order. And most of them shared one thing in common: the color of their skin. "Mr. Carter," Reynolds' voice cracked. I never thought." David cut him off, sharp and final. "Exactly. That is the problem. You never thought." Sophie Turner's live stream surpassed 200,000 viewers. Comments flooded the feed. "This is bigger than one flight. This is systemic. Chairman Carter is rewriting history live. Justice at 30,000 feet!" Sophie could no longer just film. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She knew she was witnessing something far greater than a viral clip. This was truth, raw and undeniable, unfolding before her eyes. David opened his folder, pulled out a printed document, and held it high for all to see. At the top, bold letters read, "Southwest Airlines, Anti-Discrimination Protocol." "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "I am not here to prove that one individual was insulted. I am here to prove that an entire system must change. From this moment, I announce, every employee of this airline will undergo mandatory anti-bias training, monitored independently with clear consequences. No more empty reports, no more hollow apologies. This is zero tolerance, no exceptions." A swell of murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers wept openly. The man in seat 1C, once impatient about the delay, now nodded firmly in agreement. A woman in row 3 raised her thumb toward David in quiet solidarity. On screen, Christopher Hayes spoke, his voice heavy. "Mr. Carter, you have full authority to enforce this. The board will sign immediately once this plane lands. The images from this flight will scar history, but they can also mark the beginning of a new era." David nodded slowly, his eyes blazing as the cabin sat in absolute silence. "We will turn this humiliation into legacy, and everyone who witnessed this today will know silence is no longer an option." He drew a breath, then looked directly at Lauren and Reynolds. "You have two choices. Stand up, admit your wrongdoing publicly, and become part of the solution, or walk away from this airline the moment this plane touches ground. I will not apologize for saying this. Your careers now hang on the decision you make right here, right now." The cabin erupted, not in chaos, but in the electricity of justice. The eruption of truth laid bare. And all knew, Flight 20847 was no longer just a commercial journey. It had become a trial in the sky. Lauren Mitchell trembled like a bird battered by a storm, her arms clutched tightly around herself. Captain Reynolds stood frozen, his throat dry, his eyes refusing to lift toward David Carter. David opened his laptop and tapped a few keys. The screen lit up, displaying a stock chart plunging like a runaway train. He turned the screen toward the cabin, his voice resonant and sharp as a hammer striking steel. At 7:45, the moment we were supposed to take off, Southwest stock was at $346.7 per share. Now, after only 30 minutes of this live stream, it sits at 321.5, a drop of more than 7.3%. Do you know what that means? He paused, his eyes slicing through the silence like blades. No one dared to answer. David tilted the screen slightly, his voice booming with precision. It means $847 million in market value has evaporated. All of it because of a few words and actions rooted in prejudice, committed by the very people entrusted to serve passengers. The cabin erupted in gasps and hushed murmurs. Some passengers raised their hands to cover their mouths. The man in seat 1C shook his head, his face drained of color. Sophie Turner, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand, whispered hoarsely, 847 million in just half an hour. The live stream's comment feed exploded like a volcano. They just lost $1 billion for racism? This is the most expensive prejudice in history. Justice is costly, but silence is worse. Viewers, 230,000, 240,000. The number kept climbing. David lifted his gaze, his voice like steel. Lauren Mitchell, Captain Reynolds, did either of you consider that number when you judged me? Did you consider the thousands of employees, the tens of thousands of shareholders, the millions of customers who will now pay the price for your personal bias? Lauren broke down, sobbing aloud, her words shattered into gasps. I didn't mean to. I never thought. Exactly, David cut her off, his voice cold. You never thought. And that is the problem. Reynolds whispered, his voice raw. My God, I gave the wrong order. How many times have I done this? He dropped his radio, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Before him, He no longer saw flight panels or skis, but stark numbers. Undeniable proof that his 25-year career was nothing more than a chain of links in a system of prejudice. David closed the laptop, then opened a thick folder and held up a page stamped in bold. Internal audit. Passenger removals from premium cabins. "This is the internal audit," he declared. "In the past 2 years, Captain Reynolds has ordered the removal of 17 passengers from first class. 15 of them were people of color. 2 were white. Do you still want to call that random?" Reynolds was stunned into silence. The word random stuck in his throat, unable to escape. He felt himself weighed on a scale before the entire world, and the balance had already fallen against him. Sophie Turner brought her camera closer. David Carter's face glowed in the cabin light, his eyes burning like fire. He was not just addressing the passengers, nor the hundreds of thousands watching the live stream. He was speaking to an entire nation. This is no longer about one flight. This is about a system. This proves that prejudice does not need banners or slurs. It hides behind smiles, behind procedures, and it erodes both trust and wealth. He paused, his voice dropping lower, slower, but heavier still. And tonight, Southwest Airlines has paid nearly $1 billion to learn a simple lesson. Respect is not a privilege. It is the minimum right every person deserves. The entire cabin sat in silence, as solemn as a cathedral after its final bell. Lauren Mitchell sat with her head buried in her hands, her shoulders trembling with every sob. Captain Reynolds stood frozen, his eyes vacant, staring into the void, as if searching for an escape that did not exist. The cabin was suffocatingly silent, broken only by the drone of the engines and the relentless clicking of passengers' phones recording every second. David Carter slowly rose from seat 2A, not rushing, but radiating authority. Each step he took down the aisle made the entire cabin tighten. He stopped in the center, turned, and faced the 2 people who moments earlier had believed they held all the power. "Lauren Mitchell, Captain Thomas Reynolds." His voice was deep, every word striking like a judge's gavel. "You now have exactly 30 minutes left in this flight to decide your fate." Lauren lifted her swollen red eyes, her lips quivering. "Please, please give me another chance. I have a family. I have young children. I was wrong. I will do anything." David tilted his head slightly, his tone calm yet cutting. "Your chance no longer lies in my hands, but in the choice you make yourself. When this plane lands, dozens of news channels, hundreds of reporters, and millions of viewers will be waiting to hear you. You either stand up, admit your mistake publicly, take responsibility, and commit to change, or you stay silent. And that silence will be the end of your career, with no severance, no way back." Lauren collapsed into the nearest seat, covering her face with her hands, her muffled cries echoing like a belated confession. David turned to Reynolds. The veteran captain, a man who had logged thousands of flight hours, now looked pale and trembling like a rookie. "Captain Reynolds," David said firmly, "you have 25 years of experience and 25 years of assumptions. You always believed you were simply doing your job. But tonight, hundreds of thousands of people have seen that your duty was bent by prejudice. I ask you, do you have the courage to stand before the world and say you were wrong." Reynolds gripped the back of a seat, as if clinging to the last of his strength. His voice cracked. I never thought. I always told myself I was just following procedure. But now I see those procedures never asked the right questions, and I hurt innocent people. If I must face it, I will. I will tell the truth." The cabin erupted in murmurs, some passengers with tears welling in their eyes. A woman in seat 3D raised her phone higher, whispering, "History. I am witnessing history." Sophie Turner, still streaming live, spoke through a trembling voice to the hundreds of thousands watching. "He's forcing them to choose, take responsibility in public, or lose everything. This isn't a flight anymore. This is a trial." Viewers, 270,000, 280,000, climbing with every second. Comments flooded in. "Confess or collapse." Accountability Live. "This is bigger than aviation. This is about justice." David turned back, standing tall in the aisle, his eyes blazing. His voice carried through the cabin like a verdict. "We have gone too far to turn back. I will not bury this truth beneath lawyer-written apology letters. I will make it a lesson, and the two of you will become living examples. In front of the entire world, you must choose to be remembered as those who clung to prejudice, or as those who fell and then stood up to redeem themselves." He paused, drew in a breath, and delivered his final words like a blade cutting through steel. 30 minutes. That is all the time left in this flight. But it is also the most expensive 30 minutes of your careers. The wheels screeched against the runway, the fuselage shuddering violently. Phoenix appeared beyond the windows like a sea of lights. Yet inside the cabin, the only light that mattered came from hundreds of phones, still live streaming, holding everyone's breath captive. David Carter remained standing in the aisle, hands clasped in front of him, like a judge preparing to read the final verdict. The trembling voice of Captain Reynolds crackled over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed." But no one clapped. No one spoke. The silence was suffocating, as though the entire cabin was awaiting judgment. Through the windows, dozens of television trucks crowded the tarmac, camera lights blazing so bright it looked like day. Passengers craned their necks. Some began to cry. Others gripped hands and whispered, "The whole world is waiting outside." Sophie Turner clutched her phone. Her breath caught at the number glowing on screen. 320,000 live viewers. Comments exploded like fireworks. "They've landed. Now the real trial begins. History at Phoenix Airport. Confession or career death." The intercom came alive again, but this time it was not Reynolds. It was the deep, commanding voice of CEO Christopher Hayes. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Christopher Hayes, CEO of Southwest Airlines. I want to assure you, what you witnessed tonight will not be swept under the rug. Mr. Carter is fully in charge of this situation. Upon arrival, immediate statements will be taken and accountability will be enforced." The cabin buzzed with murmurs. Some passengers whispered justice. Others nodded, tears glistening on their cheeks. The aircraft came to a full stop. The door swung open. The blinding glare of camera lights flooded the cabin like a storm. The jet bridge was jammed with reporters, federal investigators, and company lawyers. Every approaching footstep thundered like a drum, announcing the start of a public trial unlike anything aviation had ever seen. David Carter lifted his chin, his voice carrying like an order. "Lauren Mitchell, Captain Thomas Reynolds, step forward." Lauren stumbled, her eyes red and mascara streaked down her cheeks, walking as though her feet no longer touched the ground. Reynolds followed, the broken posture of a man who had lost every anchor. David turned, sweeping his gaze across the cabin, then pointed to the open door. "The world is waiting, and the truth no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the millions outside. Speak now. Admit your guilt, or end your careers at this very doorway." Lauren raised her tear-stained face, her voice hoarse but rising like a desperate cry for salvation. "I was wrong. I admit it. I let prejudice blind me. I beg for a chance to make amends, to prove that I can change." The cabin erupted in whispers and gasps. Sophie zoomed in, her live stream flooded with reactions. She confessed. Too late or redemption? Accountability, live at Phoenix. Reynolds remained silent, his hands clenched tight. He looked out toward the blinding floodlights, his gaunt face illuminated by the glare. Then in a rasping whisper that sounded like a confession, "I have been wrong. Too many times. If I can, I want to start again. Not for my career, but for my son. I don't want him to ever be treated the way I have treated others." David Carter nodded slowly, his eyes deep and unyielding. "You have chosen the harder path, public responsibility, to stand as living examples for an entire industry. From this moment forward, redemption will not be measured by words, but by actions before the whole world." The roar of the crowd outside, the blinding flashes of cameras, and the surge of live comments crashed together like a tidal wave. Everyone knew this moment did not merely mark the end of a flight, it signaled the beginning of a new era. In the world of aviation, every landing marks the end of a journey. But Flight 2847 wrote a new chapter, not only for Southwest Airlines, but for the entire service industry. When the glare of camera lights flooded the cabin, when millions of people around the world witnessed the truth laid bare, the message became undeniable. A careless word, a prejudiced glance, can wipe out an entire career and billions of dollars in value. Yet at the same time, it opens a door to admit mistakes, to turn collapse into the beginning of change. As an observer, I can say this with certainty. David Carter's lesson is not only about power, it is about responsibility. He reminded us that respect is not a privilege reserved for the few, but the minimum right of every person. Whether seated in 2A, the last row of economy, or anywhere else in society. If you believe that justice does not wait, that change begins the moment someone speaks up, then press like to carry this story further. Do not forget to subscribe so you can continue to join us on these journeys of exposing injustice and affirming human dignity. And before you leave, drop a comment with just 2 simple words. Dignity first, to prove that you too believe dignity must always come before everything else.